Hello and welcome to TFF, my YouTube channel. My name is Jouni Vilkka and I have a question for you. Can a religious belief be rational? That is the title of a paper I wrote for a philosophy seminar in 2003. This video is based on that paper and is part of a series of videos based on essays and the like that I wrote as a student at various universities over the years. I will begin by explaining the structure of this video. First, I will explain my understanding of rationality, what it has to do with the sciences, and what are rational belief formation and ethical belief formation. Next, I turn to the concept of religiosity. I talk a little bit about religions and religious belief. Toward the end of the video, I will finally analyze the relationship of rationality and religion. I talk about the presumption of atheism, fideism, and some pragmatic views. I end the video with some words about science and religion and the answer to the question posed in the title of the video. As promised, I will begin my discussion by explaining what I mean by rational and some other concepts. Features of rational thought and behavior are commonly thought to include, for example, the following: logical, coherent, consistent, well-supported, not arbitrary, the ability to predict and control, to produce a desired effect or prevent a phenomenon in the surrounding nature. A prime example of this kind of rationality is modern, as in post-Renaissance science. This kind of pure rationality can be counterbalanced with reasonableness. In Finnish, we have a single word used for both of these, rational and reasonable, so that causes some ambiguity. Reasonable is closer to wisdom, and like wisdom is directed toward values, among which truth is only one. It therefore has a broader aim than rationality in its purest form. There are numerous aspects of rationality, but I will focus in this video on only one, epistemic rationality, which has to do with belief formation. Basically, how we get knowledge. Common to all of the aspects of rationality is their normativity. They all demand a certain kind of behavior. In the core of rationality is the idea of an objective truth, which leads to the requirement that everyone should believe it. I will adopt a traditional understanding of what is meant by belief, that is, a psychological state which under certain conditions becomes knowledge. The rationality of science is best described by the concepts of fallibilism and self-correctiveness. Science is based on the idea that all, even the best scientific knowledge, may be wrong. Therefore, science must strive to correct itself. Thus, it is self-corrective. There is no absolute certainty in science. This is actually a commonsensical view, which science simply applies consistently and systematically, which are hallmarks of science. Even the methodologies of the sciences are changed according to the demands of rationality. These features of science make it the best method for seeking knowledge. Science is above all a method rather than a collection of knowledge, as it is sometimes understood to be. Of course, the method is not separated from knowledge. Science is a rational activity of a community of scientists, but what makes the beliefs of an individual rational? According to the Deontic view of justification, we, as intellectual beings, strive to believe what is true and avoid believing what is false. Our goal is the truth, and seeking that goal charges us with certain epistemic duties. As we behave according to those duties, we are behaving rationally. There are different views of what that actually means, but evidentialism sounds about right to me when it states that beliefs have to be justified with logical and empirical arguments. John Locke's principle of proportionality clarifies that we should limit the degree of certainty in our beliefs in accordance with the evidence for the belief. For example, we should not believe that something is certain when it is only plausible according to evidence. There also should be an adequate amount of evidence, so anecdotes are generally not enough to warrant belief in something. The problem with an individual trying to form rational beliefs is that it is not clear to what degree one can choose what one believes. In my opinion, individual people cannot be expected to perform with perfect rationality. What is more important is that the scientific community as a whole forms scientific knowledge rationally. It is then not necessary for every individual to be able to justify their beliefs as long as those beliefs are justified. Those are two different things. That is, we can rely on science in matters that we are not experts on ourselves. What then does ethics have to do with beliefs? The problem with beliefs is that we behave according to them. They motivate and guide us. Our behavior, even what we just say, affects others. Just as ethics covers all of our physical activities, it must also cover the way we talk and what we say, and even the fundamental origin of those things, that is, what and how we think. It may be argued that we cannot be blamed for what we cannot control, and if we are unable to control what we believe, then we cannot be blamed for what we believe. The answer to this is that instead of focusing on individual beliefs, we should instead pay attention to our habits of mind, how we form beliefs in general. We should demand from others, but especially from ourselves, generally rational habits of mind. That is, that we generally at least behave in such a way that we form rational beliefs. Otherwise, our irrationality may end up harming others. In social and public life, we must demand that, like in science, in order for a claim to be taken seriously in public decision making, it must be able to pass public scrutiny. I now move on to discussing religiosity. First of all, there is a difference between all the particular religions on one hand and religious belief itself on the other. There is no universally accepted definition of religion. Often it is suggested that for something to count as religion, it must at least include belief in at least one God. That is, it must at least include theism. I don't agree with this. Instead, what I find to be the most defining feature in religions is the religious nature of, or perhaps style of belief itself. Religions typically seem to be trying to conserve their traditional dogmas, so they are typically dogmatic. They form institutions for preserving their belief systems. One might consider the so-called objectivism of the followers of Ayn Rand, or for example, the official communism of the Soviet Union to be also forms of religion, even though they were both atheistic. Usually, when dealing with religions, religious belief is about reality. Believers believe that God, for example, actually exists. Some claim that religions are mostly just expressions of hope, or that religious language has some different non-propositional functions, but I suspect only a minority of people who identify themselves as religious actually think like that. These people may be among the highly educated among the religious, but not the typical believers. Also, if the religious beliefs are not and cannot be, due to their nature, based on evidence, then no public justification can be given to them. That would mean that they have no place in public discussion, and they cannot really have an epistemic justification, and so also lack ethical justification, as seen earlier. For these reasons, I ignore the aforementioned minority views, which I find implausible anyway. The views of the majority of religious believers, especially globally speaking, are better described by theological realism, according to which religions make claims about objective reality. They, for example, claim that a god or some supernatural reality actually exists. What is typical about these claims is the certainty with which religious believers claim to know these things. And, as Ludwig Wittgenstein noted, this certainty is without foundation, as it is considered among the religious to be itself the most fundamental thing, this religious belief that is, and cannot be justified by anything more fundamental. I now move on to analyze the relationship between rationality and religion. First, I want to point out what Anthony Flew called the presumption of atheism, that the burden of proof lies with the theist claiming that a god exists, not with the atheist. As I explained in the previous video, negative atheism does not make claims and therefore does not bear any burden of proof either. It is simply the absence of belief in gods. In a Cartesian manner of thinking, we cannot just assume that our beliefs are true, but rather we should only believe what we are justified to believe. So, the presumption of atheism does not mean an actual view about the existence of gods. Instead, it is just a logical starting point, making atheism an exemplar of rationality, as I argued in an earlier video. A person who happens to believe in the existence of God obviously does not suddenly discard that belief until they come up with a justification for it, at which point they resume believing it. That's not how people work. Of course, that would be the rational thing to do, but instead, what we can hope for is that they realize and acknowledge their lack of justification for theism, and that they understand that they have the burden of proof, so that they will not go around trying to convince others of the existence of their God, until perhaps if they manage to find a justification for it. They have to accept that their belief is irrational and that such a belief, not to mention spreading such a belief, is therefore unethical. Against this previous view, fideism, from the Latin word fides, for faith, claims that religious beliefs do not require any epistemic justification. It is based on the idea that religious language is different from everyday language, and In fact, this fideism thus is a form of relativism, and it turns into a reductio ad absurdum type of argument, as Finnish philosopher of religion Sami Pihlström has pointed out. That is, the result of relativism is an absurd swamp where no meaningful thinking can be done. So to avoid this, relativism itself has to be denied. Roger Trick notes that all forms of relativism are self-refuting. He writes that the mere assertion of a relativist position, presumably as true, shows its falsity. Our mere ability to ascertain the objective fact of widespread disagreement in the area of religion demonstrates our ability to see what is in fact the case. So relativism is not true. We are left with the more commonsensical, non-relativistic view, according to which religions do make claims about reality, and those claims have to be justified for them to be taken seriously, and for believing in them to be ethically acceptable as well. There are some pragmatic arguments for religion that I will now discuss shortly. The first is the famous Pascal's wager, which attempts to show that while it may not be rational to believe in the existence of God, it is still prudent to believe it. The main problem for this view is that there is simply no way to decide which of all possible beliefs or religions one is supposed to pick. It is conceivable that there is a God who hates those who believe things without proper justification, and therefore sends them to hell, and this means Pascal's wager is not a really useful guide for anyone and should be discarded. William James posed another pragmatic argument known as the will to believe argument. The claim is that for a belief to be rational and morally acceptable, two criteria have to be met. 1. The belief has to be intellectually indeterminate, so that it cannot be decided on the basis of evidence. 2. The claim has to be a genuine option, meaning that there is a choice between two options, both of which are living, actual possibilities, and momentous, so non-trivial possibilities, as well as forced, so that one has to choose between them, and there is no third option. James seemed to believe that whether a religious belief is true or not, it will be beneficial in that it gives people reassurance and hope and other beneficial states of mind. Possibly also he may have thought that by believing one would also get the required evidence for the belief to be rational. The most obvious criticism of James's view is that it is highly subjective and fails as a public justification of religious belief. The same method could be used to justify any religion, not just whatever James was thinking about. It provides no means by which to choose from among all religions that allegedly provide the beneficial effects of religious states of mind. The whole idea of a forced decision between two options is therefore ridiculous. One could also point at the various harmful effects of religious belief, not only in the outward behavior of many religious believers, but also the inward effects, such as being terrified of oneself or one's loved ones having to spend an eternity of torment in hell. I will end this video with some words about science and religion, and an answer to the question posed in the title of the video. It should be clear by now that science is the best form of rationality for us. It's not perfect, but it's the best. It is possible for us to educate ourselves about the current best scientific knowledge, and to remember that even the best scientific knowledge is only to be accepted provisionally, and to suspend judgment about claims when the evidence is not clear. The presumption of atheism requires that theistic claims have to be justified just like any other claims. The same applies to non-theistic religions as well. Because no religion has ever been given a proper epistemic justification, no religious belief can at present be rational. So that is the end of that. I will put a link in the description below to the original paper, although it is in Finnish, but maybe you still want to take a look at it. And I hope this video has been somehow useful, and if so, please give me a thumbs up, and if you want to keep watching and see how this channel develops, perhaps you should subscribe as well. Also feel free to leave comments below and let me know what you think about this, or if you have something to add. Bye for now.